All right, hi everyone, we're gonna get started. We're gonna try and stay on time. We'll see how effective we are at doing that. So I'm gonna be leading this workshop / training, which I typically call the Four Corners. And I've adapted it for the proposal workshop series for the EDS seminar. So I'm calling it Recognizing the Four Corners of Proposal Dynamics. So the Four Corners comes from my training as a community consensus organizer when I was an undergrad. That's mainly what I was doing. And my mentor, Dr. Judith Liu, kind of trained me on this method. And so we continue to do this. This comes from a lot of Mike Eichler's work. So if you find this interesting or you like consensus organizing, I recommend his book of the same title, which is Consensus Organizing, Building Communities of Mutual Self-Interest. And so we're going to kind of go over issues that happen in teams and issues that happen with proposal teams specifically. I typically run this training and workshop with like nonprofits who are trying to apply for a grant, or they're trying to apply for funding of some sort to deal with some socio-environmental problem. I've also worked with disenfranchised group like environmental justice communities dealing with like pollution and things like that. So it can really be applied to any group that you have formed to deal with any type of issue, which you typically do when you write a proposal. So when it comes to team dynamics, we usually see four things that people focus on when they're writing their proposal. You all need to agree on what the problem is that you want to write about. You need to agree on an acceptable solution, and that could be an intervention, it could be a policy, a tool, whatever the problem is. It could just be developing research insights to inform policy, for example. But the key point here is acceptable, and acceptable to whom? Acceptable to the team or acceptable to your funder, for example. Then you're going to have to agree on process. So how to arrive at that solution. So what methods you're using, what data you're using, if you might use community partners, these sorts of things. And then you have to agree on the purpose. So kind of a more lofty goal. So that could be your personal purpose on being on the project, or it could be the overall purpose of the proposal, whether that's to have social impact or maybe to improve educational resources, those sorts of things. So when we usually talk about proposal writing, you're usually trying to deal with these sorts of things. This is the common things that you see. However, proposal writing requires a lot of other skills. And so when it becomes difficult to write a proposal or to form a proposal team, usually I say the call is coming from inside the house. Like your house is on fire, you just don't know it. So we call this external constraints and internal constraints and sort of how we handle those. So external constraints are known constraints. It would be like things like you might potentially know who the reviewers of your proposal are. You might know who your competition is. You might know the funder priorities because you have the call in front of you, these sorts of things. Then you have things like internal constraints, which are unknown to you typically. These are things like safety, misalignment, communication. So these internal dynamics often affect the success of the proposal. And we usually look at these as like complex interpersonal dynamics. So things like miscommunication, or there's other problems get ignored or buried just due to the process of putting a proposal together, which can in itself be already very stressful. So when we're looking at understanding proposal dynamics, so far in this workshop series that we've had, we've focused a lot on the potential known, sometimes controllable external constraints. So these are things like proposal composition, alignment with funder priorities, your framing, what audience you're trying to reach, data management, and then next week we're having a workshop on budget. So these are all things that are the typical things you think about when you need to write a proposal. And so these are the explicit things. External means explicit. So managing external constraints can improve whether or not you get funding. Do you meet all the tick marks, for example? What we haven't really focused on are the potential unknown internal constraints. And I would like to say that internal constraints, even though they seem kind of like maybe scary or hairy or kind of complicated, are knowable and controllable if you know how to look for them. So these are things like communication, psychological safety. Psychological safety is things like, do you feel comfortable talking in the group? Do you feel comfortable voicing dissent? Do you feel comfortable like just sharing another viewpoint or an opinion, even if it's not a disagreement? Leadership, priorities, and then expectations, and of course, bias. So if you're able to manage internal constraints well when you're doing proposal writing and when you're forming your group, that usually improves whether your proposal is successful. So are you able to actually complete all the things you set out to do in your proposal once it's funded? And then internal, the way I remember this is internal are implicit things. They're not usually said out loud or verbalized or written down. So what we're going to do is figure out what kind of problem solver you are today and how that relates to how you do proposal writing, how you approach problems, and how you work with your team members. So we're going to get a couple things: leadership, communication, expectations, all these sorts of things. So around the room, you're kind of sitting by them right now, are 4 different labels: analyst, visionary, mediator, and tough battler. Without thinking too deeply, I want you to pick the label that you think you match with the most when it comes to solving problems. So don't psychoanalyze yourself. You just you are not allowed to do that. You have to get up and pick something that like you are immediately like, I'm that. And you have to actually stand up and move, unless you're already where you want to be. And then people who are in the Zoom space, just wait to go into your breakout rooms. I'm going to give you instructions.
That was convenient. Yeah. Welcome. I don't know what this is. Okay. Definitely not a visionary. Those are definitely not me.
We're gonna brainstorm our way right out of this stuff.
When you are solving problems, how would you typically define yourself?
I just,
I think it was it with me.
Nate is lying to me because he said earlier I'm a mediator.
Liz, yeah, I'm not that good.
It's fun because after the thing is over, usually like 30% of people vote. So that's like you typically don't always stay in the group you pick. And also I might go over there. Okay. All right. So you're in your groups. I lost track of Casey. Where did she go? Okay. So for the people on Zoom, don't go into your breakout rooms yet because I don't think you'll be able to see the instructions once you do that. So what you're going to do, we're going to spend about 15 minutes on this. We might spend some more because we've got, of course, heavy set side room over here. Is one of you gets to pick to be the scribe. And you get to be all of them, names. So you're going to essentially record the discussion you have at your table. And by that, I mean, you're going to take notes on your little assigned label on the wall. Okay. I suggest like keywords or characteristics that you come up with, you slap that on your little sticky note. And then the facilitator, whoever that decides to be, is just going to make sure that the team stays on task and that you get through all 4 questions. And I'll kind of chime in every 5 minutes just to make sure you're kind of moving through the questions. And then the reporter is going to try and like distill the discussion that you have and then share with the larger group on what you think an analyst is, a visionary is, mediator, tough battler. And it's important to remember that it's what it means to you, not what you think the word means, if that makes sense. That's why I said don't psychoanalyze yourself. So you're going to describe and discuss what the type means to each member. And then you're going to compile a list of characteristics. You can slap that on your little note there. And then the strengths of each type and the potential challenges of each type when it comes to problem solving. Okay. So we're going to spend some time on this. And then in the breakout rooms, I can also, I think, post this in the chat rooms there, right? Yeah, okay. Perfect. We're going to spend some time on this. And then I will just kind of float around. Any questions? Yes.
Do you want us to not remove the sticky notes?
No removing the sticky notes.
Okay.
That's cheating.
It's tempting.
I had to put 2 layers of sticky notes so you could still see what I wrote on there. So you would have pulled one off and been like, oh, I got hoodwinked, there's another one. So all right, perfect. Any other questions on process, questions, things like that?
We should strain this to proposal ideas sections.
No, go for it.
But it's like in writing proposals is the context.
Sort of like writing proposals and when you're working with your proposal team on writing that.
Okay.
So it's kind of 2 things, like how you would approach solving a problem in your proposal writing, whatever that is, and sort of if you're in the larger team, you know, what that looks like. But we'll get to what that looks like in the larger team after you do this. So just be like, how would you approach the problem, not the other people at your table?
And by problem, do you mean like the environmental thing?
Whatever the problem is that you thought you wanted to solve in your proposal.
But, okay, so you're not talking about.
You can even think of it as like general problem solving, like
Okay.
Like with your proposal sheet, or like.
how you approach problems, specifically only you.
Tough questions.
So if you were like, I'm an analyst, how would I solve this problem? Me. And then once you know this about yourself, we'll go to how does that affect the team?
Okay.
Okay. So that's why I said don't psychoanalyze yourself or your team members. So that's essentially from yourself, how would you approach that problem? So it should be your view, your opinion, your experience.
Okay.
And hopefully you don't sort of filter yourself because of the other people who are at your table. It should be like a genuine sort of sharing type of thing. Okay. Other questions? Good questions. My students never ask this. They're just like, okay, yeah, problem solving. Or the nonprofits also ask questions. That's great. Perfect. All right. I think then we can get to breakout rooms. Yeah, Casey? Welcome back, people from the breakout room. We're just sharing what we learned, so feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. All right, go ahead, Rob.
All right, so for the analyst group, when we were thinking about what is an analyst, the things that came to our mind were someone who breaks down problems in small steps, really thinks about how to approach an idea. I think in our characteristics, I'm gonna jump around a bit, but we really were process oriented. We're finding info gaps are really data, also very data oriented, like what information do we have, what information doesn't exist. And then planners, right? So like already trying to predetermine where there might be roadblocks, where we could pivot if things don't work out. So for overall characteristics, systematic, tangible, systems thinking people, very evidence-based, trying to be impartial, very detail oriented and very logical. Basically describing the whole. So for strengths, we think we get things done. We're trying to be very efficient, very process oriented, and very logical. And our challenges are, the first one everyone came up with was analysis paralysis, spending so much time planning that you never do anything. Maybe not always being the most innovative, especially if we'll second guess ourselves, like, oh, someone's probably done that. And probably maybe being a little detached, so not getting really passionate about the thing, trying to be very objective. And maybe analyst people are so data and focused and so process focused, we might underestimate qualitative problems, qualitative data.
Yeah, it's red now. I don't know.
Do you want to click the little sound bar?
I don't know what the sound bar is. Okay,
Technology.
while we do that, visionaries, a minute. Let's do this. Yes, you can stick up your little sticker.
We kind of talked about everything all at once, but definitely with the kind of vibe of the visionary that we discussed was someone who, I guess, in contrast to the analytical thinking, kind of starts big and then thinks about the details later. So very interested in the narrative or the societal, environmental problems that we're interested in addressing, connecting ideas from across disciplines, or thinking about what is the impact of this work going to be, which makes it easy to maybe sell the vision to other people, get passionate about it, but might later on kind of make us stumble across details that we had not thought about in the kind of big optimistic selling vision. So we did think about, you can often see a path as a visionary, but you might not have thought about all the potential dead ends or other directions you can go. And I think there are positives that you can often be kind of innovative or let your energy carry you forward and have the bravery, I guess, to go where other people might not be willing to go. But then the downsides are that some things might end up being harder, taking longer than you thought. There might not be the data to answer the question you want to do. You might not be able to hire the right staff to do what you want to do. And that in the kind of the excitement that you have about your vision, you might not be as open to other people's ideas, or might steamroll other people, or might be not as open to change if it turns out that what you were envisioning might not kind of be as viable.
Okay. All right. My mediators, whoever your reporter is, please tell us about your mediator selves and your strengths and challenges.
Yeah, so when describing this type, we came up with that it's often like translating between different groups of people on the team and also probably doing some of the kind of organizing to get everybody together and to get everybody to agreement on things. So characteristics would be boundary spanning, open-minded, empathetic, someone with kind of the soft skill set, and interdisciplinary. And those are also sort of the strengths. We didn't put the challenges in the characteristics. And then as far as the challenging, there's challenges is sort of is kind of like a gendered and undervalued role, and that is slow and exhausting, and there's not as much opportunities to go into depth in the mediator role, and then also potentially not advocating for a role.
All right, Nate, our one-man army.
Yep.
Tough battler.
Come at the front.
Yeah. So tough battler to me is kind of like grit and determination, just like kind of pushing forward, just going. Your Detective Boyle's little engines that could have long bottoms. It's kind of characters. Their characteristics are like driven, having grit. Maybe doesn't like care that much about sleeping. Moving, accepts criticism well, right? Like if you're just moving, criticism is really good. Challenges, I think like if you're constantly pushing, sometimes you need to take a step back to have that perspective. And also this ability to just kind of go and maybe not care too much about like sleep could lead to procrastination if things off. So yeah.
Great. Thank you, Nate. All right. And then I'm just going to share what our Zoom participants said. So for analysts, they said more detail-oriented, process-focused, can lose sight of the bigger picture or focus on too fine of a level of detail. Tough battler, fights for an idea they feel passionate about, which can help advocate for new ideas, question current thinking, can be hard to not get stuck on an idea or know when to cut their losses. And then we have visionary, good with big picture thinking and synthesis, can help with placing work in a larger context, might miss key details that make it possible to do the work, good at designing the airplane, not flying it so much. And then for mediator, good at seeing where there is consensus and divergence within the group through listening, can mean they do not contribute their own thoughts and ideas as much. Very good. Okay, now my question, which of these four people is the leader? Who do you think is typically the leader?
Visionary.
Visionary, okay, anyone else dissent from that opinion?
In proposal writing setting,
Okay, all right, so that means visionaries, you get to be leaders, I suppose. But I want you to take off your little double taped sticky notes and see what's under there. There's two of them, yeah, just be careful because it might tear the paper.
Yeah. Oh.
So does the new name mean anything different to you? So tough battlers are tactical leaders, analysts are logistical leaders, visionaries are strategic leaders, and mediators are diplomatic leaders. Do you like those labels? I think they fit.
About that there.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to go through and deconstruct this a little bit, and we're going to base what these things are based on like research and how people work with groups and things like that. A lot of the things you said match perfectly with how we usually put these archetypes, but then there's some things you might be like, oh yeah, that might be true or different or things like that. So, tactical leader. My one tactical leader. The tactics, the art of making moves to better one's position in the here and now. Coming up with that particular action, which at the moment gives the greatest advantage and that brings success. So you're usually flexible. So you've got some of that. You're patient, open-minded, easy to get along with, and adaptable in working with others. So that criticism piece you said is on target. These negotiators are not threatened by the possibility of failure. Bring it on, kind of thing. Okay. We're going to go through each 4 of these, but we're going to spend some time with Nate. So, tactical leader strengths. We need to move a little. I wish this would just disappear. Strengths. Negotiate with ease. High sense of immediate reality. You're concerned with what's going on right now. Good at on-the-spot decision making. Good at dealing with concrete problems. So maybe not so much abstract things. Empowered to do whatever has to be done. Aware of the comfort and working conditions of others. And then the things I said before, flexible, patient, open-minded, likable, and adaptable. And then one of these things is a strength is that you don't trouble yourself with trying to understand underlying motives or meanings. So you're kind of like surface, what's on the surface, what's going on in front of you. And then challenges can overpraise when it's not earned. You don't like being told how to work. Standard procedures can make you restless or impatient sometimes. Impulsiveness can annoy others. So having to make a snap decision in this case. May at times be careless about details. And then may make commitments for others without talking to them first. Okay. And then my strategic leaders. Visionaries. Identifies the ways and means necessary and sufficient to achieve a well-defined goal, particularly to increase the efficiency of systems. So you're usually consistently pragmatic, you're consistently skeptical, and error activated. So you like to sort of, if there's a problem or a failure, you're going to sort of attempt to fix it. Focus a lot on the relationships between means and ends, and then you like to find goals. And then we'll go over some of your other strengths. Roles of coordination. You feel competent when playing strategic roles. You're called visionary because, of course, you envision future goals. Constant contact with those you may be leading. Checking on your results. You are proud about your ingenuity and technical know-how. And then you never take others for granted. And more importantly, you want maximum effect with minimum effort. So you are sort of efficiency people. Challenges. May have difficulty communicating vision. May not say things twice and assume other people already know what you mean. Maybe too technical in the way you speak. And because of focus on like long range or big picture things, may at times be unaware of the feelings of others. And then we have our diplomatic leaders, our mediators. Diplomacy, the ability to deal with people in a skillful, tactful manner, seeing possibilities to develop human potentials and mediating conflict. So pretty much on target for all of the things you put on your paper. You typically have a natural gift for working with people, marked by personal charisma and a commitment to the people they lead, often gifted in seeing the possibilities of both the institution and people they work with, focusing intuitively on strengths. Okay. You tend to be a mentor or advocate. You like to have productive human relations, tend to draw out the best in people, show an interest in personal development. You like a harmonious, people-oriented place. That could be the workplace or a team. Comfortable when everyone has a vote. Sincerely concerned with the problems of others. And you value encouragement and acceptance. And you relate well to others. So you like our people person. Challenges. You got a lot of these spot on too. So involvement with people takes too high a toll on time and energy, on their own personal time and energy. May allow other people's priorities to overtake theirs, have trouble communicating anything negative, subordinate their own wants and needs, have a hard time with negative criticism, become irritated when treated impersonally, tend to avoid unpleasantness, and then may be too helpful when it's not needed or wanted. And then we'll have some time to deconstruct these in a moment. Logistical leader, my analysts. So logistics, I just put what logistics is first. So the procurement, distribution, service, and placement of material goods. But in the case of people, using creativity to see that the right personnel have the right supplies in the right place at the right time to get the job done. So you are decisive and take satisfaction in having things set. You're a no-nonsense understanding of the values of an organization, and you do your best to conserve these values. You're persistent, patient, and work steadily with a realistic idea of painstaking work. And then can be counted on to follow through on commitments, generally speaking. Strengths. Look before you leap. So your analysis paralysis thing is not always a bad thing. I'll get to the whole bad and good things in a minute here. Based decision making on common sense, follow through on your jobs, good at establishing routines essentially and protocols, and following routines and protocols. Dependable, good at drawing up lines of communication. You like tradition, you like structure, always on time and on schedule. And you seldom make errors of fact. And you do very well with painstaking. So, challenges, tendency to resist change. Makes it a roadblock to growth because you resist change. Might be scary or something like that, or you feel like you can't do it. You must feel like you always have to earn your keep. Want lots of facts and little theory or feelings. Want orderly and want other people to be the same. Or say you want order. You want everything to be run on solid facts. You do not understand people who are indifferent to schedules and standard operating procedures. May decide on issues too soon or avoid additional options. So you got a lot of these things when you were writing out your stuff. Some of them might be new, so they're gonna be like, okay, yeah, maybe that's fair. And this is not like prescriptive. Just because you identified as an analyst doesn't mean you have all these strengths or you have all these challenges. These are just things that we typically see in groups. And also like to say again, so like the thing I said before about good and bad connotation, we don't typically view conflict as bad. Conflict can be a good thing. Looking before you leap, that's a good thing. You're being productive. Analysis paralysis may be a bad thing. So just keep those things in mind. So we've got our tough battler, our analyst, our mediator, and our visionary. So we're going to talk a little bit how this now relates to your proposal team and proposal writing. Okay. So having all four corners creates balance. So when you have everyone in the room together, it's a good thing. Analysts and mediator leaders work well together. So you two kind of like you jive when you're in a team together. You're like, why do I work together well? Sort of these implicit things that you don't think about. And then on the other hand, you have tactical and strategic leaders work well together. So these two groups. So where is their danger when working together? What could happen? If you're thinking about the four different types of leaders you might be when you're in your proposal groups or your proposal writing. Is there any potential conflicts you could see? See head nodding. What are your thoughts? Yes, Rob.
I'm going to say tactical, but probably also visionary. Might have a problem with something like a mediator position where mediators might want to slow down, make sure everyone has a vote and do these things, where the visionary or the tactical might want to just big picture or go ahead forward and not want to spend the time to like give everyone a vote or make sure everyone has what they need.
Other thoughts?
I could see the visionary being very frustrating for the analyst who it's like, well, we need to think through all the steps and like comes in like pulling on the leash, like come back.
Yeah, that's a good description of that. These are all good, like trying to see, and these things are implicit. You don't really talk about this. You're like, I do things this way, or you do things this way. What can end up happening a lot on proposals is you will have someone who's a leader. So you might have the analyst who's the leader on the proposal, and then everyone else is a visionary. And you're like, why are we not able to like agree on something, or why are we having difficulties? It's likely because the team is actually unbalanced. It's not because the visionary is wrong or the analyst is wrong. It's just sort of needing to look at sort of balancing out your strengths and weaknesses. So if we're looking at these four different types, and we're looking at how it relates to when you're dealing with proposals, if your tough battler is your leader, you're great at proposal problem solving and working with limited time, resources, and knowledge. So like if you're having a crisis or a funding opportunity just popped up, your tactical leader is going to be able to like quickly get stuff together. If you are a visionary, you're really great at articulating the purpose and goals of the proposal and getting the most out of the proposal. So that like efficiency piece will happen. Mediator, great at bringing a proposal team together and ensuring mutual self-interest is really made clear on the proposal like that. Making sure everybody gets a vote thing. It typically appears with that. And if you're an analyst and you're the leader, you're great at identifying and building the process of proposals and very detail oriented. So when you're thinking about attributing this to how you might form a proposal, you're probably better when these things are happening. I'll also get to like, why is it you are these things in a moment. Some things that happen on the flip side of forming proposals is tough battlers, you make snap decisions that might leave members in the lurch, and may ignore processes and rules. So that frustration, some of you mentioned earlier. For visionaries, difficulty with communicating purpose and ensuring all needs are met due to focusing on that efficiency. For a mediator, you might overcomplicate roles, so like being really involved with the work that each person is doing, and can influence strong conflict avoidance in the group rather than sort of talking things out. And then for an analyst, overfocus on procedures and rules and may become paralyzed by too many options for solutions. So again, analysis paralysis. So the one thing I also want to mention before we wrap up here and have some quick discussion is there are a couple of other things that appear when you fall into one of these categories. So of course, there's a lot of personality at play, but there's also like naturally what you're good at and what you're drawn to kind of at play. So there's a question of like nature versus nurture. Am I a mediator because that's like my personality? Or am I a mediator because the career I went into or the past experience I've had has trained me to be a mediator, sort of thing. And you can also change off hats too. But if you're a tough battler, you find rigid structures, processes, and values stifling. You like to be able to do things, you like to be creative, you like to kind of do your own thing. And that means you like and you're comfortable with change. You're fine if something is not really stable. If you're an analyst or a mediator, you're like that harmony more, that structure, consistent organizational values and culture. And then the opposite, do not like and are uncomfortable with change. And typically the way I describe these two groupings of folks is you have destabilizers and stabilizers. And these are not necessarily bad or good things, because destabilizing can be good if you need to have change, if you need to make space for that. But also having, a structure and things like that can be good if you're trying to, move things along in the future, sort of keep moving that path forward. So you need both destabilizers and stabilizers in a proposal. One of you mentioned like you might get too drilled down on one idea, or you might have maybe too many ideas. And that sort of problem can appear if you have too many destabilizers or too many stabilizers in a group. Okay, and then we're gonna spend some time just chatting about your thoughts. I will reveal, well, I guess that's the other question asked. Who do you think I fit into? What are the 4 categories, I guess, for those of you who know me somewhat well?
Be over there with me.
Yeah. Yeah, over with Nate, tough battler. I did a lot of disaster crisis relief work. And so you're like on the ground having to make decisions, not with proposals, but you're going to want somebody who can make like those snap decisions and kind of do all those sorts of things. And then I did a lot of work with consensus organizing. And so then I had to be more like a mediator. So you don't necessarily fit in a box. You might spill over and kind of grab things from other groups. But I call myself a diplomatic disruptor. And that's where that name comes from. But thoughts and feelings, questions about strengths and challenges of your group. Do you feel like you should move to a different group? Name? No. Usually have like 80 people doing this at once, so.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Like we need you on every proposal team.
Why not?
They would be in high demand.
I have a question. So,
Yes.
obviously,
Yeah.
I imagine like so you're building people based on like their expertise and like what they bring to the proposal. So like
Very good,
if
yes.
you have like a proposal that's like exclusively analysts, like how do you kind of create that?
Sorry, we're gonna literally zoom through time here. So this is really good because this gets to the bias thing, where you're building a team because it fits dealing with the external constraints. Even when you build a team, you're typically building a team because you want to be able to do all this because you want the funding. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because you want to be able to like show the funder that you have competent people on the proposal and all these sorts of things. But the one thing I usually push back on is you may create a team of analysts, but it might not just be because they're analysts, it might be because you like them. So there's this sort of these implicit things that come into play when you're building a team. And so kind of being more aware of the implicit things is important. So if you're looking at your team and you're like, is there balance? Are we going to be able to like check ourselves without having other people in the group? That's where you're getting more to picking team members to deal with internal constraints. So there should always be sort of this going back and forth. It's like, how well have I met those external constraints? And how well have I met those internal constraints? And this is also usually helpful because people are like, now I know why I struggle with working with so-and-so, or why I find working with this person like super easy. It's typically because of how you approach a problem overall, even outside of proposal framing. Yes.
Makes sense to me in the like retrospective. If you're contemplating like, oh, this person has expertise that I think would be really useful, you know, for developing this research idea. Do you have any advice or thoughts on like how possible it is to assess someone's, I guess, role in this before you've worked with them?
Yeah, before you work them is really hard. It's also really hard because often when you form proposals, just you and your co-PIs, and you haven't brought on like people you might hire, like consultants or grad students or et cetera. And so you have no idea, you know, what they might fall into. It's kind of scary, but talking with people is always a good start. Usually what happens is like 60 to 80% of sort of the shared values you have are communicated non-verbally. This is sort of what we find when we like in psychology and organizational behavior. So 60 to 80% of sort of how your group functions is you all just kind of interpreting each other and responding to each other. It's important to actually inject more active speaking or writing time with each other. So if you're going to bring on someone you don't know, of course, it's good to talk with them and like ask them like, how would you approach this problem that we're thinking about in our proposal? Let's like want to talk through that with you. And it should be like, they're also going to be trying to answer in a way that you think is what you want. That's why I said don't psychoanalyze yourself. And so you want to try and have an open discussion. And if they don't want to solve the problem the same way as you, it doesn't mean that they're not a good addition to your team. It's something you have to go back to the rest of your PIs or co-PIs and think about, you know, what does that mean for the group? But it is really hard. It's not necessarily an easy thing. It's also really good if you're the lone PI or you have a group of PIs to maybe kind of walk through this and be like, what kind of leaders are we typically? Are we a bunch of analysts? Does that mean we're ignoring, you know, visionaries and tactical people? Or is it that we just don't have access to these people? Because oftentimes what happens is you kind of get siloed into your own little groupings is what happens. Does that answer your question? Other thoughts and feelings about what you fell into or questions? Yes.
Yeah, I think something we were talking a little bit is like people kind of falling into these roles because nobody else is doing it. As opposed to it being what you're good at. And so I guess I'm curious about that thing.
Yeah, so that can happen. That's sort of unfortunate is what I would say, but it's also indicative of like the team was not well built to start with. If you have sort of this like creaking happening where people are like, I really don't fit there, but I guess I'll go and do that. Which is kind of a recipe for failure because the person might actually not have like the comfort to fulfill that role. They might feel more stress or like expectations on them to fulfill that role in a certain way. And they also might not be able to communicate that well. So if, for example, like I don't know, you have a team that you've assembled 10 people and you're like, okay, we have 10 people, but we still have not figured out how we're going to assign this. Then somewhere along the way of you forming those 10 people, you were just kind of avoiding that because none of you wanted to do it, which means you're missing one of the other 3 types, essentially, or missing one of 2 types, something like that. If it's possible, it's good to reevaluate the group at that point and see, like, is it possible that someone could fit that role, or do you need to bring on another person? Because that will make the group more harmonious because you don't have someone kind of having to kind of fit themselves into a box. And that might not be possible because of like funding constraints, obviously, but ideally you could do that. Yes.
So I think looking at the distribution in the room, we're very analyst setting.
Yeah.
Pick people based on their expertise they bring to the effort, and so that means that we might lean towards that in that particular imbalance.
Mhm. Yeah, usually when I do this activity, there's like maybe 3 tough battlers. Also because people are intimidated by the word tough battler.
Yeah. Right.
And that's why I said you do it from your perspective, not what you think the word means. That sort of we call it the looking glass self in sociology. You're responding to how people are thinking about you, not actually how you are being. So you're trying to form a version of yourself that literally doesn't exist. So there's usually like a very small group, but yes.
Oh, just, I was thinking too, that makes so much sense given science, right?
Yeah.
Like I imagine if you did this sort of exercise with a bunch of like business students, you would see a different distribution, and that could also maybe inform how we from the scientific community interact with folks in other sectors.
Yep, so students typically, because they don't know what's going on, they'll like kind of distribute themselves pretty easily. When I work with nonprofits, I typically get a lot of visionaries, a lot of tough battlers, and a lot of mediators. Because usually nonprofits are lacking expertise, or types of expertise that they feel like they need, so they don't want to identify as an analyst when they're looking at problems. If I'm working with like a disaster group, they tend to be much more better at mediator and tough battler because they're dealing with like short-term issues. So they can't be visionaries because I don't have food right now. And they're not really analysts because they are always responding to some sort of external stimuli. They don't have time to kind of like think about logistics and process and whatever. So usually in those cases, mediators and tough battlers they balance themselves out really well in those sorts of cases. So yeah, and then when I deal with scientific teams, it's interesting. If I have a lot of like PIs in the room, or like executive leadership, they are literally all over here. Which I think is really funny. Or they sort of reluctantly are like, yeah, I'm the tough battler, but not necessarily because I want to, but because that's my designation. So again, that's like nature versus nurture. Are you this thing because it's your personality and you're good at it? Or are you this thing because it's like your job description? And that's like existential crisis in a nutshell. And then, we'll have a lot of analysts, very process thinking. But you will have sort of the visionaries and mediators also interspersed because you need people doing coordination. You need people doing like the goal planning, all these sorts of things. Yeah. How did we like this activity? Like it. Okay. Did you learn something you did not expect to learn about yourself or others? And nodding. Okay, I was too good. I want to just chime in with our Zoom people for a minute here. Oh, perfect. Okay. Thank you, Casey. Just like to not have time to be in the chat. But yeah, so this applies to like any team. This is also not based on team science, even though I'm the team science person at EASL. This is based on consensus organizing. And so before you can get to consensus, you need to understand how all of you are different. And again, difference is not a bad thing. That's why I called it challenges, not weaknesses. But you can literally apply this to anything. So you can apply it to proposal writing and forming proposal teams. You can apply it to when you're working with community partners. You can apply it in private industry and you're trying to build a team to sort of get a contract. Like this applies across the board. You just have to sort of fit it into specific contexts. And I do have like a sheet with all of this on it. But I'm also happy to share the slides with anybody who would like them. I've done this activity a lot and every time I like doing it. So thank you for joining. I know we went a little over time. But if you have any other thoughts or questions or you want to chat with me, I'm here.